better having had the finance update at agenda item 7, but this is consideration of the committee's own response to the Finance Committee in relation to the Minister's correspondence about the multi-year budget and his position in relation to that budget.
So maybe we better wait till it might be better informed after the finance.
Better informed.
Maybe we'll just take a short pause then and allow the witnesses time. I think we've moved through quite quickly, so we'll give the witnesses a few minutes. Maybe if we could take a pause in broadcasting and suspend the meeting with members' content. Yep.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound.
Did you get it? Requesting open here.
Yeah. Morning.
Morning. Open. Morning. Morning.
Okay, members, thank you very much. That's us resumed our meeting and broadcasting, and we're moving to agenda item 7, which is oral evidence from the Department for Communities and the financial position update. So I welcome now the following officials to the meeting: John Greer, and John is Deputy Secretary Corporate Services Group within the department; Cathy Sands, and Cathy is Director of Finance in the Department for Communities; and Olga Began, Director of Finance, Department for Communities. So John, will you please go ahead and make a brief opening statement, and then we'll move to questions from members. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and members. And just to clarify, so Olga is replacing Terry Arnold, so Olga will be helping me answer questions with regard to our benefit delivery and our work for DWP, and Cathy will ably be assisting me with the rest of the questions that you have in the other areas of our business. So, Chairs, you've already noted the briefing today is to update you on our current financial year's position, and then also to talk about the draft budget that was released around Christmas time. So in respect of this year's budget, following executive agreement of the December monitoring round, the latest budget position for the department is 930.2 million of non-ring fenced resource, 272.9 million of capital, and 31.4 million of financial transactions capital. And before I progress any further, I must apologise to the committee. You did receive a written briefing a week or more ago. A revision of that was sent and received by you, as I understand it, this morning. That was in respect of a small error where the figures were essentially in the wrong place at table 8.1 on page 16 of the briefing as originally sent. So again, apologies for that. And apologies that we didn't catch that earlier, but the briefing you have now is the correct one. So I said is going back to the DOF December monitoring round that was returned by the department on the 20th of November. We bid for 67.7 million and the executive agreed allocations of 42.4. In terms of DFC, we received 29.8 million for new build social housing, 8.6 million for the cladding safety scheme, and 4 million for disabled adaptations. Members will be interested to know that the additional 29.8 brings us to approximately 1,750 units of social development homes in our SDHP programme. There was a further technical exercise that was commissioned on the 17th of December that asked for any technical adjustments for the department. This is a regular thing that happens, and submit any reduced resource requirements. This was particularly pertinent given the much publicised overspend that the executive is facing. The technical exercise confirmed additional allocations for DFC, positively 6.5 million for disabled adaptations of capital. We also received 2.4 million of non-cash, and that was for depreciation and impairments. Coming back to this year's budget equality impact assessment, we are currently compiling the responses to that, and a final decisions report is due, and that will be presented to committee in due course. On the 26 to 30 budget, you'll be aware that on the 23rd of December 2025, the Finance Minister circulated an executive paper proposing draft allocations and seeking an agreement to launch a public consultation prior to the 26-27 budget being agreed. DOF published the draft budget on 6th of January for an 8-week consultation. It's still open and due to close on the 3rd of March. As members will know, those draft allocations are still subject to ministerial and executive approval. The Finance Minister did note that the block position was challenging. Not all bids could be met, and was further compounded by the fact that the executive budget in this year is likely to be overspent circa to 450 million. As a result, negotiations took place between Department of Finance and Treasury, and that has resulted in an agreement of a Treasury reserve claim of some 400 million, with a number of conditions and a repayment schedule of across the 3 years. The bit that we don't know at the minute is how those repayments to Treasury will be allocated across the 9 departments in the next financial year, and then the further 2 financial years in the 3-year repayment schedule. And obviously we're waiting to hear from the executive when that is agreed via the Department of Finance, as that will impact our allocations for the next financial year and all of the financial years within the spending review period. In that draft allocation, the department's earmarked resource commitments are set to be fully funded, with the exception of benefit delivery. I do want to spend a moment stressing that. So we were very welcome and happy that we received 16.9 million to recruit 400 posts to deliver benefits. Members will have heard several times that we are chronically under-resourced in our benefit delivery. And the real impact of that on citizens is that currently we only have the staff to provide about 20% of the into-work support that we need that we're meant to be delivering according to the policy to help people pursue and get back into work. So the allocation of 16.9 million was very welcome. We, unfortunately, during the financial year couldn't use all of that 16.9 million. You'll appreciate that it takes time to recruit people. We've been working very hard at that. So we actually then returned money to the centre that we knew we couldn't spend in that 16.9 million. And I believe that was 9 million we returned, Olga?
Yes.
But unfortunately, the legacy of getting that 16.9 million is we went on a recruitment campaign to recruit those full 400. We fully expect that we will have those 400 in post. During this future year's budget exercise, unfortunately, it is proposed that we will only receive 8 million a year, compared with the bids during the spending review period of 23.9 million, 33.5 and 34.8 million over the next 3 years. Obviously, this adds to a pressure in the department because these are funded posts that we have people in place, and that will be a real pressure going forward. So in terms of non-ring-fenced resource funding, we have received an opening baseline of 754 million for 26-27 with a proposed indicative allocation of 10 million, so essentially members 764. This represents only a 2% increase to our baseline. It's important to stress here that the real problem the department finds itself in is that allocation. Obviously then we have significant inflationary pressures. We all know inflationary pressures are across the piece. Citizens are feeling that. For the department, those inflationary pressures are all of our GAE costs, but not least our salary costs as well. So essentially, those allocations, as they currently sit, provide a real challenge for us to continue to deliver our demand services while obviously meeting those pay and inflationary pressures. We're currently, as a team, working very hard to look at the various scenarios of how we deal with this and are talking to our Minister about what this might mean, respecting the fact that we don't actually have an agreed budget as yet. The first principle in that, as has always been the case with the department, is that as much as possible we want to guarantee that we continue to provide critical services to citizens, critical funding to the organisations that provide those services, and essentially as much as we possibly can try to subsume this pressure as much as we can internally. I do think it's important to say at this stage it's very hard for us to do that. Of that 764 million, a large proportion of that is made up of staff costs, pre-committed costs and statutory obligations. So there's very little discretionary spend that we can shave, but we'll talk about that in more detail. And as I said, we're working with the Minister and as a department to see how we can limit the impact this has in citizens. So in terms of what that looks like, we would estimate at this stage that those inescapable pressures, as we sit here today, best case are somewhere around 40 million and worst case are in excess of 60 million pounds. So quite stark. On the capital side, our earmarked allocations are set to be met in full, except for the cladding safety scheme. You'll remember the cladding safety scheme was something that was put in place in response to the Grenfell disaster. Our proposed general capital allocation sees an increase of 40 million on the 25-26 opening general allocation of 120, but falls significantly short of need. And proposed reductions in the 28, 29, 29, 30 capital position are concerning given the level of need that DFC is projecting in the future. In terms of that need, obviously social development housing and the provision of social homes is a PFG commitment, and we are responsible for delivering on that PFG commitment. Last year the Minister took the decision to provide more than 70% of his opening capital general allocation to social development housing programme to build the 1,750 social homes I referenced earlier. The total draft non-ring-fenced allocation, including receipts, is insufficient to meet inescapable bids, with a shortfall of 45.5 million, rising to 69.6 in 28-29. This provides no funding for high priority projects. So just to take you through that, so in terms of our requirement for inescapable, So our requirement, sorry, I'm just looking at my numbers here. So in SDHP alone, we have a pre-committed tail of 104 million. We received RRI funding for social development housing programme of 107 million. So broadly speaking, 3 million left from that. And then we have received 160 million in a general allocation to cover our inescapable priorities and then to cover any new build starts. And that's really going forward why we have a significant shortfall in our capital programme. And that is not doing anything new. So no new projects in culture, no new projects in regeneration, heritage or anything, and in fact probably a decline in those areas. On a more positive note, the Department's bid for financial transactional capital funding have been met in full, except for 27-28, where there is a 2.9 million gap. We would hope that 2.9 million gap could be managed. Overall, the capital position throughout the 4-year period is insufficient to cover our inescapable requirements. Obviously, again, this will require very tough decisions going forward. Of course, we recognise this is a picture that you'll all be aware is playing out across all of the departments and the executive as a whole right now. So, as I said, thank you, Chair, and we're happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, John. So I suppose you have outlined there a very challenging budget for the department, John, particularly on the capital side of things, and that challenging picture is something that's reflected in across all departments. We understand the department has a wide-ranging remit, and there are a number of key projects which must be delivered upon, not least, as you have mentioned, the social housing, Casement Park, anti-poverty strategy, many areas of priority. Given that it's not going to be possible to fund everything, how will the department prioritise its budget going forward to ensure that executive commitments are delivered upon?
Okay, so the first thing is obviously executive commitments and statutory obligations are the top of the list in terms of what we aim to deliver. That's why I mentioned our first thing is to subsume the pressure as much as we can internally, while guaranteeing executive commitments, obviously earmark commitments and so on and so forth. But this will be extremely challenging. We're working through scenarios at the minute. We are hoping to meet with Minister on Thursday to take him through a set of high-level scenarios. They will cover everything from what he might be able to do in social development housing programme, what he will be able to do with his inescapable in capital. It will paint a picture where essentially he will have to prioritise social development housing at the cost of almost anything else. On the revenue side, actually the position is much more stark. If I'm honest, the department has went through a number of years where it has had a significantly constrained position. That is reflected by the amount of additional investment we've been able to provide outside the department and the amount of investment we've had to been able to make in the department, which is why the department has continued to carry so many vacancies, which is why the department can't deliver a sense policy parity in the welfare space, because we don't have enough job coaches to engage in back to work activities. So if I could use a term, we are already significantly challenged and we have faced significant cuts in the department. So on the revenue side, we are struggling to see how we will basically subsume these pressures, if I'm honest with you. Our early analysis would suggest we will do everything we can, but ultimately we will be presenting some scenarios to the Minister that will involve cuts. And that's something that the Minister will need to consider and prioritise.
Okay, thanks. John, in relation to the challenging picture around social housing, and I do want to focus on that, the committee wants to see more investment being put into social housing by the department. The Minister of Finance has stated that under his budget, this department is set to receive a general allocation of, I think it's capital deal of 570 million over the next 4 years, on top of earmarked allocations of 770 million, including 441 million for housing. Is that correct?
Yeah, so basically you're referring to the RRI funding. So yes, there's ring-fenced RRI funding of 423 and then 2 separate allocations which are earmarked for housing. But I think as John has already referenced, the reality is the carried forward commitments under that programme are over 400 million. So therefore, if we looked at it on a very broad basis of the RRI versus the carried forward commitment, there's only about 34 million left to deliver social housing.
Okay, so if social housing is the number one priority, would you accept that it's now incumbent on the Minister to ensure that the majority of that general allocation goes towards social housing?
So can I reference you back to the current year in terms of the year that we are in? Minister did exactly that. Over 75% of the general allocation went to social housing. The difficulty is out of that 160 million, there's a raft of other inescapable pressures right across the department, right across urban regeneration, culture, arts and leisure. So the difficulty is there's a shortfall, and that's laid out in the briefing. If you look at the briefing in terms of table 5, it lays out the need and then lays out the shortfall in table 6. So Minister, if he includes the social housing need, has 355 million of inescapable bids and has 267 million of an allocation, which is 160 of the general allocation and 107 of the dedicated RRI. So then if he takes into account his departmental receipts, he still has a shortfall of 45 million. So even if the Minister took a decision to dedicate all of his funding to social housing, he will have a shortfall of 45 million on his inescapable projects.
How much of the general allocation is the department planning to direct towards social housing?
I think John has referenced that. We're not in a position to give an answer to that. There are conversations ongoing and we're working that through and trying to look at the scenarios that we need to play in here. So if you consider some of the decisions that Minister took this year, i.e. there was no funding given to disabled adaptations at the outset of the year, those things will all need to be considered as we work our way through this budget.
And when can committee expect to get the outworking of those discussions so that we have a clearer picture?
So, Chair, I think the first thing is this is a draft budget. We don't have an agreed allocation. So in terms of the proper order of things, we're actually going ahead working on the assumption that these draft budget allocations, if and when they are agreed by the executive, will not alter materially. But the first order of things would be that the executive would agree a budget allocation. Then we would seek ministerial approval for how we would dice and splice that draft allocation to his priorities. We would then bring that back, and obviously then we would enter into an equality impact assessment of those.
What's your anticipated timeline for all of that? I recognise those are the steps, but what's your?
I can't say because I've no understanding of the timeline when the executive agreement will take place.
Okay, I'm going to go to members then. I'm going first of all to our Deputy Chair, Cathy Mason. Cathy, Lanneray, Paul.
Chair, and thanks guys for the presentation. There's just a couple of things we mentioned that I want to pick up on, and it was around inescapable pressures, and it was referenced there to some of the decisions that the Minister took this year as well. And we have heard quite a few announcements from the Minister over the last year about funding allocations going towards a number of different capital projects, and I suppose in my view it just hasn't always been clear as to how these projects actually align with executive priorities. So I'm hoping maybe you can help us understand that a wee bit better. So the first one, and there's probably about 10 I can think of off the top of my head, but one that I want to pick up on is £70 million allocation to the Queen's Parade in Bangor, which I'm sure you'll agree is a significant sum of money, especially in the current fiscal climate. Can you give us an idea of where that project would have sat in the list of priorities, and is that an inescapable pressure?
So actually the 70 million of funding that was provided to the Queen's Parade project in Bangor was part of the Belfast Region City Deal agreement that was agreed by the executive. And so that money is actually held centrally for that project and has previously been agreed by the executive.
Okay, so there was nothing then came from the department to finance that? That was fully financed by that?
That will be fully financed by the City Deal, by the City Deal monies that were agreed, I think, a few years back.
Right, okay. Then another one then I want to pick up on is the allocation to the Ulster Museum. Again, a very significant funding allocation there for a single project. Where would that, can you give us an idea of where that would sit in the list of priorities? And you know, is that a priority again that would be bigger than housing? And just again to try and get an understanding maybe of how many houses could have been built with that.
Yeah, so I can't speak to how many units of social housing that could be built with that, because the numbers depend on the development and obviously the housing association grant rate and so on. But what I would say is that obviously the department has a statutory obligation which with regard to heritage and museums. And one of the challenges that the department currently faces and probably will face in more extremist going forward is that a number of our heritage sites and our heritage attractions are falling into disrepair. In fact, a number of them have had to be closed due to health and safety concerns. This was a proposal to reinvest in the Ulster Folk Park, which has not seen investment over many number of years. And the Minister took the decision to fund that proposal under his statutory responsibilities to provide investment on that site.
So I appreciate that, but can you give us an idea? Is that an inescapable pressure? Like it's
Not yet.
£40 million, I think.
Sorry, excuse me. It wouldn't be an escapable pressure yet because an ICT has not been appointed for that at this juncture.
So do we know where that would sit in terms of the priorities? If housing's the top priority, where that would come into the Minister's list?
I couldn't speak to the specifics of any ministerial list. I would say the fact that the Minister has funded it, has committed to funding it in future years, is a strong indication that it is a high priority item for him. Okay, so and just again with the likes of the Musical Instruments Fund, I think it was at £1.1 million or something. Is it the same? Falls under the same?
It's deemed as a high priority project. It's not deemed as inescapable. Okay, so I suppose where I'm really trying to understand, we're saying here that social housing, and we're looking for more money for social housing because of the severe pressure that we have there, but there are other projects that are being prioritised over that. Can I just maybe clarify in terms of the inescapable high priority? The social housing development programme, the only element that is actually inescapable is the element which is contractually committed and is carried forward. But we have actually deemed it as inescapable as a department. So whenever we submitted our bid to DOF and we highlighted it to DOF officials, we told them that we were putting the full amount of social housing as an inescapable need, given its sort of stature as it being an executive priority where it's at with the housing supply strategy. Okay, no, I appreciate your answers. Just think it's a stark maybe just as to where the priorities actually lie, but thanks for that. Okay, thank you, Cathy. I'm moving then to Pam Cameron. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation this morning. Clearly, huge pressures within the department and, of course, across all the other departments. We all fully recognise that. I suppose just on the back of some of the questions that already just happened, this committee has shown its support to earmarked funding for SHDP. Could you possibly give us your assessment of should that be agreed at the executive level by all the parties? What would that mean in reality? What would we see as a consequence of that should that earmarking of the housing be agreed?
So look, I will give you my assessment as Finance Director in terms of the advice that I would have given to Minister around that correspondence. The reality is we have a raft of inescapable commitments, and the concern whenever we would ring fence it would it impact our general allocation. Would there be the £235 million of need? If that is reduced, we would then have an easement on that spend.
Thank you. And in terms of the Northern Ireland housing sector revitalisation, I'm aware progress has been made on this, but can you possibly detail that and advise on what the next steps are, and are there any indications of timelines in relation to that, and whether there are consequences for not securing these powers in the short to medium term future, and what mitigations the department are making on that case?
Yeah, so I will say that this is the highest priority for the Minister and the Department, and engagement takes place on a daily basis between our officials, housing executive officials, and Department of Finance, who act as the conduit to Treasury. We continue to work with DOF to accelerate the agreement of housing executive revitalisation as part of the fiscal framework negotiations, and we continue to say that if the fiscal framework negotiations have a risk of slowing an agreement over housing executive revitalisation and the accounting treatment with regard to loan borrowing, then they should be decoupled from that. To answer the second part of your question, the implication for any delay in that, we use the term, not a very good term, the meter's running on this. So housing executive stock continues to age and decline, and the cost to make that stock fit for purpose continues to increase because of inflationary pressures. As a result, the housing executives' ability to deal with those pressures is reduced because they are continually accessing their reserve to meet that pressure. There will come a point in time where those two things diverge, and without a solution, the housing executive will not have the capacity in its reserve to meet that. We don't know when that will be because there's a lot of moving pieces to that, but that's how the pressure really manifests. And eventually you reach a point where the number of homes that will be available will be reduced because they will no longer be fit for habitation.
I'm sorry, I just add to that,
Yep.
John, as well. So there are obviously, because of the need for alternative finance being pressing, our Minister obviously put a proposal in terms around RRI funding, and that's currently with DOF colleagues to assess the need. And we mentioned inescapable bids. So the inescapable bids for the department include need in and around this of 70 and then rising to 80 million as we go through the scheme of this budget.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask a brief one maybe on if you've any update around the fraud and error bill? Any progress on that at Westminster, or where are we with that in terms of this department and any proposed legislation?
It's not obviously agreed yet, and it's intended then to put it in place also here in Northern Ireland. That would require executive approval. So yes, it hasn't been agreed yet.
Hasn't been agreed yet at executive level or at Westminster?
Both. Yeah.
Both.
But the positive thing is it was referenced in the spending review in terms of the business case that was submitted to Treasury, and the potential for us, potentially if it's agreed, to be able to receive 50% of any savings that could be manifest from the increase in fraud and error detection.
Okay, and I think we've spoken about this a few times in committee, but if you could reiterate what those potential savings could look like in terms
that
of
business case then was submitted in advance of the autumn budget then to Treasury, and in the autumn budget then they did agree to discuss that with Northern Ireland Executive. So we have asked for approximately 9 million of investment into fraud and error activities per year for the next 5 years, and we estimate that would generate circa 45 million of savings, AME savings per year, per annum, then over the course of the project. We have got a terms of reference already for review into our fraud and error activities, and that is commencing. That's actually commenced already because they've already asked for information exactly, etc. So that will be worked on the next number of weeks and months, and we hope to get a decision then from Treasury on funding that business case. The 50% is what we've asked for, i.e. 50% split of any savings that are generated, but that hasn't been agreed yet. That and then it would need to be transferred from AME saving to resource style. So all of that is yet to be discussed, but it is underway. We've just agreed terms of reference, and it's just started this week, that review.
Thank you.
Yeah. And just to be clear, I'm picking up on that point, so is the 50% of a potential 45 million?
Yes.
So that's 22.5 million.
Yes.
And you're seeking 9 million to go after that 22.5 million. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Is that like do you as finance officers see that as being, is there a risk attached to, what is effectively double coming back from what you're spending, or is that in keeping with what you'd normally expect for spend?
So all of these are basically based on experiences and analogous experiences, and obviously you have to understand that DWP, our partner department in England, have invested significantly in fraud and error, and we can see the savings that they have already made. So and in fact, the encouraging thing is we have never had the same amount of resource as DWP have had in fraud and error, but we've had a much higher and a more effective way to detect fraud and error. So we would have a very high level of confidence that those estimates are sound and that the risk is mitigated in terms of the return. But nothing can be 100%.
Oh no, I don't think any of us, if we could get 100% certainty, would all be going for it. So I'm moving on then to Kelly Armstrong. Kelly, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to do quick fire questions if you don't mind, because I have a lot to ask you. The overspend impact and obviously the borrowings that we have now, has there been any discussion if that will be capital and revenue or just revenue?
Just revenue.
Just revenue, thank you. And we don't know yet how that's going to be divided out. A question for you, you've talked about the pressures that you have because of the requirement for staff. Is there any way to review the contract with DWP with regards to the work that has been done for them to make sure that full cost recovery is being met?
So there is a way to review that contract, but we would have the utmost confidence. I mean, the principle of that is that it is 100% fully funded.
Okay, it's just the fact that if our staffing costs for other areas under full cost recovery, then that portion would increase. So it's just to see if we can get as much as we can out of them for doing their work.
So yeah, the relationship with DWP is such that if there's an increase in the cost of anything, it is reflected in what we receive from them.
Okay, thank you. Table 1 that you provided in your pack, the welfare mitigations, what's that figures based on? Because I know that my colleague has been asking a lot for welfare mitigations. There's figures provided there, but we still don't know how many people are being affected by the reduction or the removal of the 2-child limit and what that's going to bring for the benefit cap.
So in table 1, the welfare mitigations, you're referring to the figures in the table 48.2, 40, yeah. So those were what were submitted to DOF in advance of the removal of the 2-child limit ever being announced. So they are for all welfare mitigation payments, which most of that is the bedroom tax, the biggest element of it. So in addition to that, we submitted a further bid then of 9.4 million for next year, rising to 9.7 million the following year, and then 10.1, which is to cover the additional welfare mitigation payments in relation to families that will now meet the benefit cap who didn't previously before the 2-child limit was removed.
Okay, thank you very much. And very quickly, sorry, I'm flying through these. Priorities and budgets, I share a bit of concerns that Cathy Mason has already highlighted. I appreciate it's draft at this stage, but is there any granular detail on what that list of high priority matters and inescapable matters are? Because I know we've got headline figures here, but if we could maybe have a look at that as a committee, because we're here to assist the Minister as much as to scrutiny.
So Kelly, I could actually probably refer you back to the previous briefing that we get, and we give you the detail breaking it all down by the categories, because actually I have an appendix 1.3 that was in previous briefing, and it detailed all the categories in behind.
The categories, it's what's in all of those categories. Is there any further detail on that?
Well, those bids will be at a point in time, and I think we would say you're probably better to wait to get the outworkings of the refinement exercise at the minute, because these are quite old now at this stage, really, because I mean that was done July, August time for submission in September, October last year. So we're refining everything, both resource and capital, and that will come to you in due course.
And as the Chair has said, we are absolutely behind the Minister to get social housing built. However, I have no belief that the figures that are in this will be able to be delivered because of other implications that are not within your control. So what cross-departmental discussion has there been on the ability to actually deliver on the projected homes, the ones that are in the bids? Because I met with Build Homes Northern Ireland yesterday, and they're saying unless water's sorted, this ain't happening, folks. I've already got several closed catchments in my area, so my concern would be there'd be money set aside for social housing development that can't be delivered because of Northern Ireland Water.
Look, I'm probably not able to get into the specifics of that, Kelly, but what I do know is that in terms of that social housing development programme, they work very closely with colleagues in other departments to bring forward the projects which won't have issues in terms of infrastructure or water.
Which may not necessarily be in areas of high need. Yeah, because the priorities for Northern Ireland Water are very different. No, I get that. I'm just very concerned that that's going to hamper the bid process for communities because it needs to go elsewhere. And then just Northern Ireland Housing Executive, this revitalisation has been going on forever. There is a plan B here. When are we going to start to talk about that?
I think we are, which is why we submitted
Plan B is split it into a housing association and into a housing authority, because then they can borrow from almost immediately.
So I'll pick up on that in terms of the negotiations that we've had which have involved Treasury, NIO and DOF officials. I can just clarify that the issue in and around the consolidated budgeting guidance is actually not considered a showstopper in terms of those conversations. It's just there's a lot of work to do in providing them with the information that they need. The reality is it's part of the full fiscal framework. We're hoping that the negotiations will allow it to be front-loaded as such in terms of those negotiations.
Yeah, I'm just very worried that if we wait for the perfect of what we want, then there is a plan B that could be there now. I know it needs a change in legislation and so on, but I'm watching the homes falling apart. You know the issues with them. Yeah.
Sorry, could I just say as well, obviously referenced in terms of the query from Pam there as well. The RRI proposal is with the OF colleagues as well.
No problem. Thank you very much. That was rapid fire and you did really well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kelly. And moving then to Melissa McHugh. Flannery, Melissa.
You're all very welcome again. Just quickly, if I can move in on an announcement was made by the Minister only last week in relation to support for veterans. Was that decision agreed by the Executive?
I'm not aware. So I would need to look into that and come back to you.
Okay. And will this scheme be open to all veterans? For example, the area that I live in, there are many people resident who were born and raised in Tyrone but are also Irish Army veterans, or is it exclusively for those that served in the British Army?
Yeah, so to Mr. Gren, I'm not across the detail. I'm happy to provide something back in writing to the committee on that. I apologise.
Just before Marisa comes on to his next question, are you not acting in the role of Permanent Secretary at the present time?
No, I'm not. Eamon Borelli is acting in the role as Permanent Secretary currently.
And as a senior member of that team, then, does none of those decisions, unless they're in your direct line of sight, none of those decisions come your direction?
So on this one, and I apologise, I was off for a week's holiday and maybe I missed this one, but I don't have the awareness of it. Kathy, do you have anything? No, so we will have to come back to you on that with our apologies.
What scheme is it? Sorry? What scheme is it?
The Minister announced a scheme for
affordable warmth or make the call?
Well, actually, the scheme was announced by the Minister.
Two separate schemes, yeah.
So he announced affordable warmth would war pension would be an exemption, but there's also, if I read it right, exemptions under wider disability, which is the wider affordable warmth scheme, which is available to anybody under the eligibility criteria. And the make the call is dedicated to.
And I'm going to allow Melissa to continue his question, and then you can come in with.
Yeah, I'm just clarifying.
Okay. No, and I think there's probably an overlap in terms of the question and around both of the schemes that have been announced in the past week.
But I just wonder, to what extent have you any knowledge, to say, of this particular scheme yourselves, or is it the case that you may not be in a position to be able to answer other questions that I had in relation to it?
I don't know at this point because I don't know the question. So there's been conversations in the department about how we deal with the implications of the Veterans Covenant in terms of, and we have appointed a senior sponsor for that work, which is Lindsay Farrell, the grade 3, and she's been working across the department with colleagues in housing executive, and make the call in respect of that.
Yeah, so in fact, is she the nominated strategic lead?
Yes, she is.
She is within that. So then I asked the question, what are the financial implications for the department in respect of repurposing staff to service the advice line that was part and parcel of this announcement as well?
So I think our approach to that at this stage is we're unclear what the volume of those calls will be. There's an existing infrastructure there that has capacity to adequately deal with the calls that we will see. If we need to dedicate more staff to that, we will make that assessment at the time. But for instance, we have a team that are already doing make the call. So this is a matter of obviously routing specific calls from veterans to specific touch points within the Make the Call cohort. They have a dedicated script in respect of the support we will provide specific to veterans.
And part of the announcement as well was about the promotion of road shows and the likes of that there to keep people informed in relation to the service. So all of that costs money, and at a time that we're talking in particular about budgets and so on, where's this money actually coming from, or where is it being taken from within, let's say, the current budget, i.e. that is at the Minister's disposal?
Yeah, so I think the costs for the roadshows and things still need to be worked up, and they will be part of any consideration the Minister makes with regard to his next financial year's budget, because those roadshows have still got to be planned and paid for.
Well, appreciating that, I know that you have limited information in relation to the whole audit, but can we actually receive information in relation to the questions that I've raised here? And if we actually include in that as well too, I asked the question, has an EQIA been carried out in relation to this particular project?
At this stage, an EQIA has not been done on this project. I'll need to speak to Lindsay about what the approach to that is, and we'll come back to you via correspondence with the detail that you've requested.
And I know then, just in relation to what Andy had mentioned there as well, to the Northern Ireland Fuel Poverty Scheme, that this was pitched as a cross-government approach and contained no mention of separate arrangements for veterans or war pensions. What basis does the Minister have to include this exception in the Affordable Warrant Scheme, and in doing so create privilege for former British soldiers?
Again, I apologise, but I'll need to research these things and speak to the strategic lead and come back to you on those matters.
Sir, if I might, I think we need to be very careful with our language.
I'll allow Melissa to choose his own language, Andy, and I'm coming to you. I have your indication here.
I'm amazed.
You need to wrap up, Melissa.
I'm amazed just at the total lack of information, we'll say, currently in relation to this whole scheme. So I would appreciate if we can have that forwarded, we'll say, to the committee.
I apologise, and I'll expedite that information.
Has there been a change of policy in relation to either of these schemes?
Change of policy for
in relation to those schemes, is that indicative of a change of policy?
No, I don't believe that has impacted in any policy area. This is just additional activity, or not even additional. It's an additional routing and use of existing infrastructure in respect of the commitments that the Armed Covenant places on government and departments.
Okay, well, we can look at it. I think one of the things I saw in terms of the publicity of it, which may not have been accurate, but we can drill in, was it said policy change. So I'll check that out for now. Okay, so moving on to Sian. Go ahead, Sian, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I want to talk a wee bit about the welfare mitigations to start off with. I'm really concerned about a repeat of a previous cliff edge, and I'm just wondering, in terms of this multi-year budget, what's the planning going on at the moment in terms of that 2028 cliff edge for mitigations?
We have bid for in the last year of the 3 years, 28-29, then for 49.5 million for welfare mitigations. That was before the removal of the 2-child limit, and that has been met in full then by in the draft executive budget, and then we've also submitted then a further amount of 10.1 million, which hasn't been met in full, but we would hope that in coming years that could be added. I think there's only 2 million or so left in the indicative allocation for that year to meet this, but it's been met in full for next year and the following year. So up until certainly 28-29 we have it fully covered, and in 28-29 yes, there's still a shortfall in what we bid for the additional amount required because of the removal of the 2-child limit. Yes.
And are there plans being put in place for anything post 2028, or are those conversations happening in terms of forward planning? You know, in terms of, are there plans to extend the legislation to, you know, have those conversations been had, or is it just that's the 28-29 and we'll deal with that when we come to it?
I'm not aware of any conversations yet on that. Obviously, yes, it's a few years until, but yes, that welfare mitigations have been extended, until, so I'm not aware of any activity looking at when that ends yet, anyway.
Yeah, just keen for us not to repeat that cycle of only really considering it then in the budget year that we're approaching. That's all, you know.
So sorry if I could just add to that. Excuse me, there's been some very early conversations about reviews and evaluations that might be considered to inform what would be the most appropriate and intelligent future type of interventions. And fortunately, with regard to the child benefit cap within the draft budget, while there wasn't a specific allocation provided to the additional that was required, there was a narrative in there that it would be expected to be met when it is understood what it is. So.
And then in terms of discretionary support, this is something that I've brought up a few times, just to be very clear. This is one of the very few safety nets in terms of people experiencing a crisis, and whilst closing the name discretionary support, I understand that isn't something that's categorised in any way as inescapable or high priority, but to those receiving it, it absolutely is high priority. And I'm just wondering, in terms of the planning going ahead for potentially particularly this financial year, what is the thoughts, or what is the assessment of that at this moment in time?
Yeah, so you're right. It isn't classified as high priority or pre-committed or inescapable or so on. It has received an increase in funding. We bid for it in the multi-year exercise, and amongst the raft of things that Minister will be considering, it will be amongst them. But of course, recognising the very vital role it plays.
And do you know, in terms of least worst case scenario, will it be around reducing awards, reducing the categories, pausing the scheme, completely ending it? Are all options on the table? Have they been discussed in terms of a tiered approach, or what's the thinking around it?
So as I referenced earlier, we're hoping to sit down with the Minister on Thursday and discuss a number of scenarios. So they haven't been presented to ministers yet. And I think at this stage of the conversation, it would be more along the lines of, Minister, are you content to maintain discretionary support at its current level, more or less? And then if it is less, we would discuss what the quantum of that is and how we might deal with that in the working of and the allocation of awards.
Right.
And there is a review almost complete of discretionary support as well.
Do you know the timeline for when we can expect that?
That's now in Cherry's area, so
Okay.
I think it's in the final stages of evaluation, so it'll be close, but I'll check with Cherry and come back to you, Sean.
Great. And then up to, just very quickly, just the 9 million returned, it's obviously really disappointing. You know, to get 16.9 million for the recruitment process and to deliver more services in terms of, or deliver the benefit, the support. Why? What are the factors that have come into that 9 million being returned?
Yeah, so I mean, if you'll do me the pleasure of speaking frankly, for any organisation to recruit 400 people in a year in this labour market is extraordinarily challenging. Recruitment is a responsibility of NICSHR, which is under the purview of Department of Finance. Undoubtedly, our recruitment needs to be faster. In line with that, we have worked with colleagues in NICSHR to launch a pilot. While the pilot wasn't perfect, we hope there will be future pilots. That pilot's seen people express an interest for a job and eventually be placed in a job in the Northwest in 12 weeks. Prior to that, sometimes it has taken longer than 12 months. Just to be, if I could, we bid on the 16.9 million in the hope we would be able to recruit 400, recognising some of the challenges we would face. The real critical thing is, whenever you bid for posts, we always expect that will be a recurrent bid, because we are recruiting people who are going into jobs who will need to be paid that year, next year, and so on. The problem here is this has not been recognised as a recurrent bid. despite the fact that we are very firmly on our way to recruiting the 400 million. So despite the fact we return money in this financial year, the coming financial year, we will need all that money and more because we will have the people in seats working.
Is that DWP or DOF?
So in these posts, this is all, so sorry, it's DOF. DWP is completely separate.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Sean.
Thanks.
Andy, Lannery, Anish, Liddell.
Thank you, Chair. And if I can just touch quickly on the veterans issue, and the reason I took issue was that these schemes and initiatives announced by the Minister are under the purview of the Armed Forces Act, which is about removing disadvantage. It's not about creating privilege, and I think that's where we need to be careful about our language and our word. There's already many veterans right across this province, and sorry, Chair, I probably should have declared an interest as a former member of the military myself. There's many veterans right across this province who do feel it difficult to reach out and interact due to hypervigilance and security concerns, and we know why that is. So I think we do need to be careful in our language when we raise that. It's about removing disadvantage and challenges that members of the community in which I come from have. If I can pivot to the budget briefing in that regard, the inflationary increases for regional, stadia and the sub-regional, now the football fund, how much does that total across the board?
Okay, so in reference to, it's there within the briefing. So if we look at casement, there's inflationary there of 52.4 million. So that's across 2 years, 28-29 and 29-30. And then within the Northern Ireland Football Fund, there's a 15 million in 28-29 and a 12.2 million in 29-30. Alongside that, there is also inflationary amounts for the previous projects, Windsor Park and Ravenhill.
So in excess of over 100 million in inflationary uplifts across those different schemes. And was that funding that the Minister proactively sought, given the inescapable pressures that he has, or was that allocated by the Executive, or was there an executive agreement on this, or is this just the Finance Minister proposing that?
So that was not bid for as part of DFC's bids. That was money that was allocated as part of the process that went on in the allocation process. Okay,
and then I note there's a proposed allocation of 50 billion under FTC for the Northern Ireland Football Fund 29-30. Is there any more detail on that? For example, obviously we've seen the UK government give FTC, and they changed the rules around the allocation of FTC for casement. Is there any engagement on that to have a similar approach taken, that there would be no strings attached, i.e. repayment conditions attached to that FTC funding?
I know this is something that the Minister has raised with the Minister for Finance specifically in a bilateral.
Is there any more detail as to what that FTC would be for out with those discussions? Would that be potentially at the minute, if that agreement wasn't brought forward, to provide loans to clubs to deliver additional upgrades?
So that's one option, and that's still being worked through.
Still being worked through. And in terms of the FTC, and I appreciate obviously in response to Kelly's question about that more granular detail, and that would be really helpful, because obviously we see all the high level stuff, but it's difficult for us to be able to actually delve into that. But specifically in relation to FTC, and I apologise if you provided that previously, it would always be good for us to have that when we're actually having the budget briefing to be able to refer back to, rather than having to dig in and try and find it. But can you give more detail? Is that primarily housing related, though, the FTC over the multi-year?
So I can sort of give you the break. You know, the 72.8 million that you have for the incoming year is about 38 million in and around co-ownership. There's about 27 million of intermediate rent. There's $1 million for retrofit, so that's the bulk of it. And that will continue across those 3 years. What's then within the 29-30, and you've already referenced it, is the 50 million then for the Northern Ireland Football Fund.
It's all specifically housing related, pretty much.
It's the co-ownership. It's the standard stuff of co-ownership. It's then the intermediate rent, the leave for move on accommodation, and that's the major element of it. The other stuff is very small, but we can certainly get you a breakdown of that.
I appreciate that. That's just the more general rule right across all of the resource and capital, so that we can actually delve into it and see what the priorities are. And you know, I may take a different view around the priorities around the musical instrument fund. You know, I think it is an absolute priority for the department, should be, because of the value that delivers within our communities, and the arts is often underfunded. So you know, I think it is an important area of the Minister Fund. And maybe one final point: local growth fund. Obviously a massive issue at the minute, and I note in the Minister's letter he references that. Was there any bids put in for that? in the context of if the UK government doesn't change its approach on the capital to resource split?
So the local growth fund is being managed sort of via DOF, and it's obviously the Ministry of Housing, and that's all being worked through currently.
No, I appreciate that, but is there any proactiveness being done by DFC? You know, because the current trajectory would indicate that the UK government aren't for budging on their current approach, although they've been told quite categorically that it's going to have a devastating impact. Is the executive, obviously given DFC has that primary role, are we looking at it? Has DFC taken any approach around bids?
So the involvement here is that DOF is working with all the NI departments, the NIO, and obviously the Ministry of Housing across the water to inform development of a Northern Ireland investment plan for local growth. So there's activity ongoing.
Okay, appreciate that.
But I think it's important to say that the Minister and Department officials recognise the critical impact this could have on the sector and providers, and are engaging with the sector and providers on a daily basis. And to understand that and looking at what might be possible within a very constrained budget if this turns out that the UK government do not recognise the impact of the switch between capital and revenue. So Andy, just to be sure, it's something that's very high on officials and of course ministers' radar.
Can you point me to anything specifically built into the draft budget that would be able to be utilised should that not change?
No, because at this stage that's a responsibility for DOF because they manage that funding via MHCLG, so it would be for them to consider that. I think when we see the outworkings of this, then that's when we will work with Minister to look at what the art of the possible is to try and fill any gap that may have been left.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. And Morris then. Go ahead, Morris, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try and be brief, but I'll just touch upon what Andy said there, that the Minister's Armed Forces Service is actually to ensure there is no disadvantage, not special advantage. And as a committee, we would need to see that all members of our community are not disadvantaged in any way, in any form. So I'd have to agree with what Andy said there. Can I touch on the workforce, please, and the current vacancy rate, and how dependent is the department on temporary or agency staff? So, what savings would that accrue if that was sorted out pretty quick? And I'm not talking about a differential, I'm talking about staff in general.
At the minute, across the department, and this does include DWP funded posts, we have 7,430 permanent staff and over 3,500 agency staff. I think that illustrates the point I made earlier with regard to a very constrained position for the department for a number of years and some of the recruitment challenges we face. Morris, in terms of the savings we would make if we were able, for instance, if I understand your question correctly, to switch those 3,500 agency staff into permanent posts, I'm not clear what that saving would be. We would need to do a little bit of work on that. Obviously, there is additional costs when these people move to a permanent post as well that would need to be considered. The department is of the view, as I'm sure you are, that this is not an optimal position to be in. As much as possible, we would want to see people be given sustainable career opportunities in permanent posts with the Northern Ireland Civil Service. And as I mentioned earlier, we're doing everything we can to simplify and streamline our recruitment processes to try and reduce, I guess, this dependence on agency staff that we currently have.
Yeah, and it would be based on a regional basis to ensure that there's an equality of opportunity right across Northern Ireland, not specific to any particular site.
Yes, so Morris, obviously our recruitment is led by Department of Finance and Northern Ireland Civil Service HR, and is largely where people are placed is largely dictated in where the work is done in the buildings that are there. But we're always very keen to obviously create regional balance, which is reflected in the recent pilot we did in the Northwest, which was specifically for admin officers to be placed in operational centres in the Northwest of the province.
Yeah. Again, there's a definition of what's the Northwest and what is the Northwest, so that's for a different matter. Arm's length bodies. Which major arm's length bodies are cost within the plan, and is there really any way that you can control what the department spends on arm's length bodies?
So all of the costs for the arm's length bodies is costed within our budget. So we provide funding to all of those. Obviously, we have a number of ALBs that are of significant scale. Probably the largest of those is the Northern Ireland Housing Executive. Then we have Arts Council Northern Ireland, Libraries NI, so on and so forth. I will say all of these organisations we work in partnership with, but through that partnership we take a rigorous view of all of their funding proposals. I would say that, like the department, ALBs, quite honestly, have faced significant challenges and cuts in recent year. And unfortunately, I would expect that to continue given the draft budget allocations that we have currently seen. But I think, to answer your question, Maurice, the funding for ALBs is within the control and purview of the department and the minister.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice. Mark, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to the team for coming in with all the lovely bleak news this morning. A lot of the big items have been touched on, but just in terms of, I suppose, the implications of within the proposed budget envelope for the community and voluntary sector, I was wondering if we get just a wee bit of clarity on that, because I'd see in the 3-year bids there's a much smaller amount bid for or hoped for in 26-27 than the following 2 years. I was just wondering, in the context of the stuff around the local growth fund and that we've discussed, the end of the shared prosperity fund, but also the withdrawal of lottery funding that's nothing to do with the department from a number of projects, very good projects that's left them in kind of a limbo now. But so why is there a lower amount proposed for next year, I was wondering? And can we even meet that, given what you've been told you probably get?
Okay, Mark, so I'll take that. So the voluntary and community sector as a department, we're probably giving them in the region of about 33 million of the budget of about 750 million. The bid that you're seeing in front of you there is a 5% year-on-year additional requirement for that sector. Alongside, within that sector, there's 3 LBs, Nicky, Copney and CCNI, and that's the requirement over a 3-year period. And it's, just to clarify, it's not that it's less of a requirement, because bear in mind we're building on each year as we submit these bids. So while it's 2.9 in the first year, then we move on, and it's on top of that each year whenever we're putting the bids in.
Yeah, and I get that C&V spend is spread over a number of different areas, such as your neighbourhood renewals and that, but I think it's just important.
There's 5% inflationary uplift is built in, but I think we would have to reference you back to the opening statement that John has given you in the detail there, and the level of pressures that the department is greeted with as we move into the next financial year. You know, a minimum of 40 million with the potential to flex up to 60, depending upon how the reserve claim is dealt with.
And then my old favourite, finally, and that's rate support grant. I was heartened when I saw what was being bid for the 3-year budget, but disappointed, although not shocked, when I saw what we're going to get or might get should this go through. What would the councils be looking at then this coming year, given the current position?
Okay, so given the fact that essentially the bids that we put in, amongst which was rate support grant of 12.4 million, and we received nothing towards that, the current envelope for rate support grant in this year is 3.1 million. But again, I have to reference you back to the opening statement and the conversations that we have had here. There's going to have to be a look by Minister right across, and rate support grant will be no different to anything else within the department, and it will have to be considered as for options for future years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Kelly, a very, very brief one, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask very quickly. I know that Treasury have said that they're going to do an open book exercise. Has it started with yourselves?
So it's just kicking off. So we've just recently received the terms of reference and some initial information gathering templates.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just a final one from me then, and thank you for your presentation. A good day. And actually, it's probably something that we should look at doing even more often. It was very illuminating today, I think. But in terms of as we're moving forward, how does the department propose to monitor and report to this committee on the cumulative service, equality and socio-economic impacts across the multi-year budget? So we're moving in hopefully into this multi-year budget period. Very, very welcome. However, how will that be monitored and communicated to committee, all those changes as we move through that period, particularly, and this is a real risk, if funding gaps widen or if monitoring rounds fail to yield additional resources to fill the gaps? How you plan to do that, John?
So, well, I'm happy to take the lead from the chair and committee, and certainly officials are always happy to provide briefings to the committee at any time. It's my understanding we have standard quarterly updates with committee, and we will report on that. And of course, happy to take anything from committee in terms of the format or protocol for those reporting. Obviously, given the constrained financial position that we were in, we are likely to be in the future years. Chair, we will be monitoring our financial outturns even more closely, if it's possible, than ever before, and the impacts of those decisions that the Minister will ultimately make going forward. I think it's important to say as well, that given the financial position that the Executive is in previous years we have been able to produce some easements. Those easements have largely came from our salary line, given our chronic, under-resourcing. It's unlikely now that we will have that same facility. And I think it's unlikely that the Executive will have the same facility. So again, I think you will see a much reduced level of funding, certainly on the revenue side, coming through monitoring rounds. So again, the ability for Executive departments to respond to these impacts as we learn and understand them, I suspect will be more difficult in the years ahead.
Okay, thank you. Really brief, Andy.
Yeah, Chair, just another thought that came to mind. The approach the department's taken in relation to the FTC, the 2930 for the Northern Ireland Football Fund, has there been any thought in the department, and particularly we've had briefings recently from hockey and cricket as to the need for those other sports, is there any thought around broadening that funding for other sports?
Yeah, so that's something that the Minister is very interested in and ask officials to look at. So we are looking at ways that we could deploy FTCs for other sports, including cricket and so on. And we're working with obviously those sporting bodies as well to see what the art of the possible might be in that space. Obviously, one of the few areas where there does seem to be small amounts of money available is in financial transactions capital. So we want to use that opportunity as much as we can.
Appreciate that, Chair. Thanks. It'd be good to be kept updated on that.
Yeah, no, I think there's lots there. We're obviously going to be into lots of
You're going to
very brief. And only, Kelly, because you were very brief and you saved a minute in your first one, so I'll give you another 30 seconds.
It's a very quick one. Whenever you're putting the bids in, you talked about the community and voluntary sector, but the social return on investment of investing that money gives back to Northern Ireland X amount. Is that broken down and provided into the bids into Department of Finance?
Typically, Kelly, we provide a supporting narrative to any bids we make, and where we have data in terms of the return on that investment, we will recognise that in the narrative that supports our bids.
Thank you.
Okay, so listen, I want to thank all of you for attending today. Clearly, it's a dire situation in many ways. I have to say, it's very clear that the underfunding remains a huge problem, and I know that discussion's ongoing as well. And I think it's going to take a very strong cross-executive approach to address that core problem of lack of funding for public services. But thank you, John, Olga and Kathy, thank you for attending today. Appreciate it.
Members.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Okay, members, any follow-up actions then, members? Okay, moving on to, go ahead, Kelly.
I was just going to say that open book exercise has me interested. I don't know if we as a committee would be able to get the outcome of that whenever it finally becomes available, and with that only starting now, but I don't know if there's any way that we can maybe write. I don't know who to. Is it the Northern Ireland office or the Treasury to ask when they have provided it, obviously, to whoever they need to with finance, I assume? Would it be possible for a breakdown on the Department for Communities for us to, as the committee, to have sight of that?
Member content, we explore?
Yeah, probably via Department of Finance.
We could be asking them to share it.
We'll ask a question. Our members agree?
Are members content with that?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, members. Moving on to agenda item 8 then, which is the draft multi-year budget for 2026, 29, 30 and consideration of response to Committee for Finance. So the papers for the agenda item are the same papers as for agenda item 7. They start at page 490 of the meeting pack. The purpose of this item is to seek members' views in relation to the financial briefings and what the committee is content to reflect in response to the Finance Committee. I'll take views from members, and then we'll move to see that in the context of everything we've heard today in relation to finance, we can feed that in. And is the committee content then, we'll be looking at, is the committee content for the response to the Finance Committee to summarise the substance of the Minister's position on the multi-year budget. So any thoughts, members, or any? Go ahead, Kelly.
I think we need to know a little bit more. It's early days at this stage, but how that overpayment will be divided out, because we're Department of Communities isn't receiving really a lot of that money, so it would be very unfair for the Department for Communities to have to carry a weight of that overpayment repayment in future years, because it will have such an impact.
So how that will be calculated per department, or for the Department for Communities in particular?
If it's revenue, I know it may not affect the capital so much, but it will have an impact, especially given our welfare mitigations.
Okay, and are members content for the committee team to draft a committee response based on today's briefings to the Finance Committee?
I ask that we also include something about that cross-departmental discussions on the budget, because I have a fear our Minister goes on ahead and if he's successful in getting all his money for social housing, I'm just concerned that there are other implications out there that could cause problems with that and put pressure on other ministers as well, because if we're looking for another 5,000 houses to be built and infrastructure needs the money for Northern Ireland Water to fix what they have, you know, it has a knock-on effect. But it's just to ask is it the Department or Committee for Finance?
It's the Committee for Finance.
If they're looking at how the cross-executive, cross-departmental work, you know, how do you say it, merging their information, how they're coordinating.
Yeah, how they coordinate. And I think John did indicate that they do work quite closely in terms of delivering the projects that can be delivered to get the numbers. But Mark, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I was just, I suppose, if we could emphasise to them the importance of the alignment of the budget, obviously with programme for government, objectives, so that'll hit the housing, but also the pending anti-poverty strategy, which is also cross-departmental, and every department is going to have to do a bit to tackle that. And I would argue, again, rate support grant is something that should be, I don't want to get into this where we've been over the last couple of weeks, but in my view, it firmly should be ring-fenced at executive level before coming to DFC and being vulnerable to the cuts that department or any department faces thereafter, because that's actually driving poverty.
Members content with those? Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, Chair, just to expand on Mark's point there, I think it's the broad range of strategies as well. You know, we're constantly being told these are high-level executive strategies that are going to make a difference in people's lives. But, you know, if you look at the briefing, and we didn't get delving into it in a deeper sense there today, the disability and work strategy, for example, has no funding attached to it, and it's pretty much the same for all strategies. I say that in the context of the challenging budget landscape, but I think it's important for us to highlight that the broad range of strategies that people are on the ground are being told they're going to make a difference in their lives have no funding.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I also think it's important that the department itself is prioritising and focused on what they're doing as well. So I think that's something that we should be keeping an eye to as well.
Just on picking up on Andy's point there, the difficulty we have here in Northern Ireland, when you look back at the green paper or white paper, whatever it was that the Chancellor had produced, is the sanctions that potentially could be hitting people who are being seen not to proactively look for work. And it's being targeted at people with disabilities, let's face it, because they want to have more people there. So there are issues. The other thing I was just going to say was the Committee for Finance, there was a piece of work done on the identification of public land that could become available. Are they looking at anything there? And also that point I made about the social return on investment. Are the Committee for Finance looking at where are we getting most bang for our buck? There's obviously priorities, as Mark has highlighted, but social return on investment, if you looked at the community and voluntary sector funding for supporting people, for instance, for every pound that's spent in that is actually effectively releasing could be 8, 10, 12 pounds back in value to the government. So our Committee for Finance looking at that sort of detail.
Okay. Do members wish to see the draft response before we send it to the... Bring it back here. Yeah.
You're professional on that.
I assume, are we going to be echoing the Minister's comments around local growth? In many respects, and certainly I'm sure other colleagues are hearing this, many of the organisations are already significantly underway with their processes. The UK government have caused absolute devastation here. Yeah. I have no difficulty in saying that. Their approach has been ill thought out and ill judged. And they should really reverse it. I know we as a committee have repeatedly said that and written, but I also think the executive, could have done more in contingency planning. Again, I do recognise that that's against the difficult budget landscape, but it's going to be a little too late, to put it blunt, for many of the organisations, many of the people supporting, many of the skilled staff that are on redundancy notice are going through that process now.
Yeah, I think there's broad agreement. Claire, you attend to that element?
Yeah. We'll put a section in at the end about committee's concerns, so the paper will be a response based on the draft multi-year budget, the Minister's response to it, and then committee's concerns. Okay.
Yep, that sounds good. Okay. Okay, thank you, members. So I'm going to propose we take a short break there, a short 5 or 6 minute break, and then we'll resume with our agenda item 9, a number of SL1s. Thank you.
Committee Room 29, sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound.
Should I?
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, so we're resuming our meeting at agenda item 9 to agenda item 12 to deal with a number of SL1s. The same officials will brief us on agenda items 9 to 11, and then another separate set of officials will brief us on agenda item 12. Members will have the opportunity to ask questions after the briefing on each SL1, and I will overview then next steps and seek agreement for the required actions at the very end. All 4 of these SL1s are subject to the new process that was introduced on the 5th of January. Members will not be asked to make a decision about the policy merits of those proposed statutory rules today. A reduced timeframe has been requested for these SL1s on the basis of parity, and letters from the Minister outlining these exceptional circumstances can be found at page 529 and 579 respectively. So moving first to agenda item 9, which is SL1, the Pension Protection Fund and Occupational Pension Schemes Levy Ceiling Order NI 2026. This SL1 was received on the 18th of February and the relevant papers can be found in the meeting pack at page 525. We have with us from the department briefing us today on the next 3 SL1s, Michelle Grills from the Pension Policy Lead and Ciara McKeown, who's Deputy Pension Policy Lead. So obviously the 2 very right people to have. So you're very welcome this morning, and I'll not run through the purpose of the proposal for delegated legislation as you're here and can do that for us. Please take the committee through the detail and then we can move to questions from members when you're finished, and then we'll move to the next SL1. So please go ahead then. Who's leading on?
Yes.
Yeah,
So thank you, Chair, and thanks to the committee for the opportunity to speak to you today. And with your permission, Chair, I intend to speak on the 3 SL1s now in respect of the Pension Protection Fund and Occupational Pension Schemes Levy Ceiling Order Northern Ireland, the Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order Northern Ireland, and the Social Security Revaluation of Earnings Factors Order Northern Ireland.
Yep.
Thank you. Yep. These orders come before the committee under the new guidance for delegated legislation. The committee will be aware of the continuing time pressures experienced by the department in delivering parity legislation, and as detailed in the SL1s, we require deviation from the timelines specified in that guidance in order to maintain parity with GB. As the committee will be aware, although pensions are a devolved matter, in general Northern Ireland's pensions policy and legislation operate in line with the corresponding pension provisions in GB as provided for in section 87 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998. So in effect there is a single pension system and regulatory regime across the UK, and indeed many private pension schemes operating in NI are UK-wide schemes. So all 3 of these orders are technical routine orders that are completed on an annual basis. So when the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions makes one of these routine orders, the Department's empowered to make a corresponding order. The Department has no powers to set different amounts or percentages for Northern Ireland. I'll now give a brief overview of the 3 orders. So the Pension Protection Fund and Occupational Pension Schemes Levy Ceiling Order Northern Ireland 2026 specifies the Pension Protection Fund levy ceiling for the financial year beginning on the 1st of April 2026. The Pension Protection Fund, which was set up on a UK-wide basis, provides compensation for members of eligible occupational pension schemes where the sponsoring employer is insolvent and the scheme has insufficient assets to pay benefits at fund compensation levels. The compensation is funded through annual pension protection levies imposed by the fund and charged to all qualifying defined benefit occupational pension schemes. The levy ceiling is a control mechanism which ensures that the amount raised through the pension protection levies by the fund does not exceed a prescribed maximum. Secondly, before April 1997, a defined benefit occupational pension scheme contracted out of the state earnings related pension scheme had to provide a guaranteed minimum pension. The Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order Northern Ireland 2026 specifies the percentage by which the guaranteed minimum pension element of an individual's occupation pension entitlement is increased with effect from the 6th of April 2026. It specifies the percentage by which that part of the guaranteed minimum pension attributable to earnings factors between the tax years 1988 to 89 and 1996 to 97 is to be increased. The order requires contracted out occupational pension schemes to protect guaranteed minimum pensions against inflation up to a maximum of 3%. During the latest review period, the general level of prices increased by 3.8%, so therefore the order prescribes an increase of 3%. And then finally, the Social Security Revaluation of Earnings Factors Order Northern Ireland 2026 provides that earnings factors related to national insurance contribution for historic tax years used in the calculation of additional state pension and guaranteed minimum pensions maintain their value in line with the increase in average earnings. The order will also provide that the earnings factors for earlier tax years are revalued at 2025-26 earnings levels to ensure they maintain their value. During the period between September 2024 and September 2025, the Office for National Statistics average weekly earnings statistics showed a year-on-year increase in average earnings in GB of 4.8%. So that's the figure used in the operating calculation this year. So in accordance with the new guidance, we've supplied drafts for both the Pension Protection Fund and Occupational Pension Schemes Levy Ceiling Order Northern Ireland and the Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order Northern Ireland. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to supply a draft of the remaining Social Security Revaluation of Earnings Factors Order Northern Ireland, as the corresponding GB instrument has not yet been made and is not in the public domain. The Department has completed the prescribed screening exercises, and there were no negative rural, regulatory or data impact protection impacts identified. Section 75 screening was also carried out, and the policies do not have any specific negative implications for any of the prescribed categories. We'd be happy to take any questions from members.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. So I'm going to go back now to each of them for members individually. So the first one we're looking at then for questions is agenda item 9, which is the Pension Protection Fund and Occupational Pension Schemes Levy Ceiling Order. So I suppose it's important to note in general that the committee are always keen to ensure the best possible scrutiny. However, we're also very keenly aware of the parity issues and the potential impact that might have on people here. So we're always kind of, I suppose, trying to address that dilemma as best we can. In light of that, in terms of the timing of receiving the papers, given the NI order was cleared by Department Solicitor's Office on 6th of February, and we received papers on the 18th of February, what's the delay there, or could we have received this sooner in this particular instance?
The issue is trying to get the order. We are dependent on the orders being published and made in GB. So by delaying it slightly, we were able to send you one of the extra orders because it was only debated basically as I was doing preparing the pack. So it allowed me to set that. So it was a kind of a balance between how much we can send and the timings of it. So that seemed like the best option to give you as much information as we could.
Okay, members, any other questions in relation to that? Sian?
I just have a brief one. The regulatory impact, there'll be negligible costs for businesses and charities and voluntary bodies. Do we know what that's likely to look like for?
The levy ceiling order this year, it may actually not have any effect because the pension protection fund is actually in surplus. They have significant surplus. So this year they had actually put the sort of conventional levy was decreased to 0. Okay. Now it hasn't been agreed, but it's proposed to do the same for this year. Okay. So if that happens, this order will actually not really have any impact. It just has to be done each year. But
okay, sorry. Yeah, that's useful. Thanks, Michelle.
And just briefly, and this probably to an extent covers each of them, I would think. But how do you assess, if you don't do an equality impact assessment, how can you then assess that it doesn't have significant equality implications? What's the process for that?
Well, there is an equality screening done, so we do go through, each of the categories and, look at each of the 3 orders and assess them against each category to make sure, an EQI will then be done if there was impacts found, but it wasn't deemed necessary as there's nothing negative.
Okay, so I'm going to then open up for questions from members to agenda item 10, SL1, and this is the Guaranteed Minimum Pension Increase Order. That was received on the 18th of February, and the relevant papers are in the packet, page 542. Michelle has briefed us on it, so do members have anything to ask on this? Can I just ask, why was there a delay in getting this to committee on the 18th of February? What's the delay in that one?
That actually was the one that we got from GB at that time, so then we were able to send that one on. So. Okay, and are there any communications in relation to this going out to any of the occupational pensioners or the occupational schemes? Do you communicate the changes to those on a routine basis?
There isn't any actual communication goes out. This is a figure that's released in every year, and the relevant organisations and schemes know to look for this and await that these figures coming out. No additional communication sent from us, no.
Okay, any other questions, members, on that one? No. And then agenda item 11, which is the SL1 on the Social Security Revaluation of Earnings Factors Order, NI 2026. Received on the 18th of February, and the papers can be found, members, at page 559. You'll note that we do not yet have a draft SR or EM for this particular SL1. Michelle has briefed us on it. But if I could ask briefly, Michelle, when can we expect to see the draft statutory rule and explanatory memorandum?
The last I've heard from GB, it's going to be made on the 5th of March, so that's when it will be in the public domain. Okay. Thank you, members. Any other questions on that pension revaluation of earnings? No? Members content. Okay then.
Okay, so I'll thank Michelle and Ciara. Thank you very much for attending and briefing us. And members, I'll outline the next steps for all 4 SL1s after the next briefing, but we'll go to the next briefing now, and then we can come back to the formal pieces that we have to do. Thank you both. So can I now invite Jennifer, Karen and Mary to the table for the next item, please? And we're moving on, members, to agenda item 12. SL1, the Social Security and Statutory Maternity Pay Evidence of Pregnancy Amendment Regulations, NI 2026. Members, this SL1 was received on the 19th of February and the relevant papers can be found in the meeting pack at page 575. You will note that we do not yet have a draft SR or EM for this SL1. Joining us from the department now are Jennifer Gibb, who is Principal for Work and Health, Social Security Policy, Legislation and Decision Making Services. Karen McCann, Principal for Work and Health Maternity Allowance Operations, and Mary Gately, Deputy Principal for Work and Health Social Security Policy, Legislation and Decision Making Services. And again, I think ideally placed to answer questions around this, given your roles. So you're very welcome this morning, each of you. And I'll not run through the purpose, given that you're here to do so. Can I please ask you to take the committee through the detail, and then we'll get to members' questions when you're finished. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for giving us the opportunity to attend in relation to the SL1 for these regulations. The committee will be aware of the very particular challenges that the department faces in the timelines relating to priority social security legislation and our legal obligations in that regard. Unfortunately, we've not been able on this occasion to share with the committee a draft of the proposed statutory rule and explanatory memorandum as required under the new procedure, which came into effect on the 5th of January. I will explain the timing issues for this SR, but I'd firstly like to outline briefly what these regulations do. The SR provides for an evidential change which will benefit claimants of maternity allowance and statutory maternity pay. At present, the legislation requires that the MAP B1 certificates are signed in ink by a doctor or midwife. These original documents must be provided to departmental decision makers or employers. The proposed SR will remove the requirement for the original ink signed certificate to be submitted to the department. In due course, this will support the move to an online application system for maternity allowance. However, there will also be an immediate benefit for claimants using the current paper-based claims as well, because it will allow for copy maternity certificates to be provided. Making parallel amendments across maternity allowance and statutory maternity pay will avoid confusion for claimants by ensuring that women claiming either payment are subject to the same evidence rules for proof of pregnancy. The equivalent DWPSI will be laid on the 3rd of March 26 and will come into force on the 1st of April 26. The department intends to lay the SR no later than the 11th of March. This is in order to ensure the regulations can come into operation on the 1st of April in alignment with DWP, while adhering to the 21-day rule. This will ensure that claimants in Northern Ireland who may benefit from the flexibility of providing copies of the certificates as part of their paper-based application can benefit from this positive change immediately. Unfortunately, the department has been unable to share the draft SR and explanatory memorandum with the committee as set out in the new guidance. This is because we have not yet received the final draft of the DWP regulations. The latest draft of the DWP explanatory memorandum was received on the 24th of February, and the latest draft of the SI was received on the 25th of February. The department considered delaying the regulations to allow for the required scrutiny process. However, the technical amendment made under this legislation will have a positive impact on Northern Ireland maternity allowance and statutory maternity pay claimants by enabling them to submit copy certificates. Therefore, any delay in the operational date of the regulations could have a detrimental impact. The department has conducted the usual screening exercises in relation to this SR. No rural child impact, regulatory or data protection impacts were identified. A Section 75 screening was also carried out, which concluded that the policy would not have significant implications for equality of opportunity or good relations, and that an equality impact assessment was not necessary. We're happy to take any questions from members.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose for me, Am I right in thinking this allows the application to not be an ink-signed one? But does the option to do it the old way, the ink-signed way, remain?
It does remain.
It does. I think that's important because I know we often assume it's handier for everyone online or whatever, and it is for many people. However, given we've just come through the sign language bill, and there's lots of different reasons, rurality, why people. So I'm pleased that's the case, because I know where I've heard other situations where it said we will make an exception should someone require face-to-face or whatever. Doesn't always materialise on the ground. So that deals with that one for me. Am I right that the DWPSA is being laid on 3rd of March?
Yes.
And will we then be able to get that so we can consider on our 5th of March meeting? Will you get that through to us in time for us to consider on the 5th of March? Which I think is what you're currently planning.
Next week. Possibly. It would be a quick turnaround. We just have to see the final draft and obviously look at Northern Ireland version, and then obviously speak to Departmental Solicitor's Office and just see that they're content with the Northern Ireland version. So it would be very tight, so I wouldn't like to say 100%, but we would certainly try.
Yeah. So, and what would the implication be for us if it wasn't? We'd be further hampered in our scrutiny role.
Is implementation from the 11th?
Implementation from the 1st of April. We're allowing the 21-day rule, so we're wanting to make ours on our lay hours on the 11th of March then, to make the 21-day rule.
We could possibly move it out another week.
Okay, well, okay, Kelly.
Thank you very much. Just can I ask, I know the plans are that the online service won't be available for us on the 1st of April. How soon do you think that might be coming in? Is DWP paying for the online stuff? And just for clarification, I'm thinking of people in rural areas and getting access to a scanner and copier and all that. Is a photograph, a digital, going to be allowed on this? Do you know?
Well, to answer your first question, we don't have an exact date of when this will be rolled out in Northern Ireland. It's being tested from April in England and Scotland first of all. So depending on that, then when it will roll out to Northern Ireland. Regarding the copy of it, would you know
So
more as a concern?
to be a scanned copy can be uploaded with the online, the online application form, and then with those that are applying clerically, they can provide a copy as well. So
and our DWP paying for the computer system? Good. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything further, members, or are members content with that? Okay, listen, thank you all very much, and good luck with your ongoing work, and appreciate your attendance here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members. So, members, just by way of reminder that the absence of the draft copy of the rule, which is the case for 2 of these SL1s, does not prevent us as a committee from proceeding, but we were reminded a number of weeks ago this should be exceptional and should be recorded in the minutes of proceedings. So the Minister has requested that the committee consider all 4 of these proposed statutory rules within a shortened timeframe. Can I ask members, are members content to consider the proposed statutory rules within the shortened timeframe? Yeah. And can I just confirm, therefore, that the Pension Protection Fund and Occupational Pension Schemes Levy Ceiling Order NI 2026 and the Social Security and Statutory Maternity Pay Evidence of Pregnancy Amendment Regulations 2026 needs to be considered next week on the 5th of March. And the Guaranteed Minimum Pension Increase Order NI 2026 and the Social Security Revaluation of Earnings Factor Order 2026 will be considered on the 12th of March. Members content? Can I remind members that a shortened time frame does not preclude the committee from issuing a call for views. However, this may result in the committee making a decision on the SL1 before responses are received. Any responses will contribute to committee scrutiny at the statutory rule stage rather than the SL1 stage. Okay. And members should note, please, that the committee will next consider these SL1s as agreed on 5th and 12th of March, alongside a summary of any comments and feedback received via Citizen Space up to that date. The committee team will issue a call for views on all 4 SL1s using the standard survey on Citizen Space from today, 26th of February 2026. The call for views for each will close at midnight on the 11th of March 2026. Alongside this, the SL1 and any relevant papers from the department will be published on the committee website and notified to relevant stakeholders alongside the relevant deadline where appropriate. Are members agreed? And do members have any further comments they wish to make at this stage?
Can I just ask, are we at, if we have instances where the department, it's not their fault to be honest, it's coming over from Westminster, are coming to us late, are we asked to collate as a committee those times or how many times that happens?
So through the chair, obviously, there's a tracker being kept at an assembly-wide level for each committee. So that will be collated and reviewed then in due course. I think they want it to run for 6 months initially to see how it goes.
Yeah, no, that's great, because I just think that we've put in place as an assembly a process, and it'd be good to see where Westminster isn't able to provide enough information on time.
Yeah, and we'll need to keep the pressure on to get the information as quickly as possible. However, it will also be the case, given the amount of parity issues this committee deal with, it will likely read very disproportionately, as this committee very often been, and that's something we have raised repeatedly. But it's a reality of this new system will generate that. Okay, members, thank you for that. I'm moving on to agenda item 13, SR 2026-24, and this has come through the old original system, so that's why this is sitting. So this is the pneumoconiosis, etc., workers' compensation, payment of claims, amendment regulations, NI 2026. A copy of the SR is at page 594 of your pack. Can I remind members that the committee considered the SL1 at our meeting on the 8th of January, and therefore that fell under the previous process. Following consideration of the proposal, we confirmed that we were content for the department to proceed to make the rule. Have members any objection to the rule? No. Thank you, members. Can I therefore ask formally that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2026/24, the pneumoconiosis, etc., workers' compensation, payment of claims, amendment regulations, NI 2026, and has no objection to the rule, subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Great, thank you. Agenda item 14, members, the Forward Work Programme, a copy of which is at page 605. Do members have any comments, or are you content to note the Forward Work Programme? Content, thank you. Agenda 15 is any other business. Do members have any other business they wish to raise? No, thank you. Agenda item 16 then is date, time and location of the next meeting. Our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, the 5th of March 2026 in the Shannon chamber, actually, in the Senate here in Parliament Buildings on the 5th of March. And members, as our final agenda item is a review of committee strategic planning, I propose the meeting now moves into closed session, if members are agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Okay, and I'll ask the clerk to take us out of broadcasting and remind members that could take a couple of minutes.
Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Committee Room 29, sound. 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 Committee Room 29, sound.